Welcome to Podnutz Pro number 29. This is the show where we take you from you fixing home PCs and viruses and reinstalling the Windows to servers and networks and firewalls and routers and all that good stuff. You know, like the one aisle at Best Buy that everybody stays away from. That's where we're taking you. So, my name is Lalo, and the co-host here is Mr. Matt Rainey. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, Lalo. Thank you.
Good, man.
And you.
Oh, man, it was a rough day. It was one of these 8-hour days where you don't take a lunch and it feels like it's a 14-hour day.
They're all long days. Although for me, it was a pretty good day because I got to watch soccer all day at work. So, I mean, while I was working. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
While I was working.
Because my next question was the PC even on?
It was on, but since I
Okay.
have 3 monitors, I had the soccer on dedicated to one monitor just for today.
Oh, all right then. Very cool, man. Alrighty. Thank you for everyone for listening and downloading the show. And Mr. Matt Rainey, what's our topic for today?
Tonight we're going to talk about permissions, shares, permissions, security on folders, files, and such.
Oh, and this is a nightmare for just so many people for so many different reasons, because permissions can be quite simple if you have a strategy, or it can be the biggest nightmare of your life. So,
That's right. And it's not that complicated, except if you have a strategy and you understand how the permissions work, it's not that difficult. And what not to do, more importantly, as with anything else, what not to do when setting these permissions. So, I guess we'll get started. Of course, on a server, the main goal is you're going to access data. You're on your workstation, you want to access a share that's hosted by the file server. So to do that, you've got to share a folder on the server, first of all. Now, the strategy for this is different for every company, what they want, how many different types of data they have, what departments they have. But for small business, what we usually have is the user shares, which are by default on small business server only allow access to that user. So those we don't need to worry about
okay.
much because that's automatic. Usually we have a data share, just a broad data. It's everyone in the company can have access to it. So we have a public data share. Some companies might have a share dedicated to their accounting software or some kind of drawings or some kind of sensitive data where they don't want everyone in the company accessing it, just certain people. And that's, I think, how most companies are. There's data where everyone can get to, there's data just for the user, and there's data for some people. And that's where you have to start with.
And that is very true. And what Matt is describing is a typical the setup for most companies. And there's no right or wrong as long as you know what the layout is. I'll give you an example of the company that I work for. Everyone has their user drives. They have a public drive like Matt is describing to his data. And our public drive, we have software. We have files that are available to the whole entire organization. And then also we have group drives. Depending on what department that you're in, you have access to those drives. So again, a little bit different, but same concept. As long as you understand what the layout is, and then you're good to go.
Yep. So what I'll normally do, let's just start with the data drive first. And this is a drive that is public. Everyone can have access to it. That's an easy share. Basically, when you create a folder on the server, you're going to right-click on that folder, go to sharing and security. And I'm in O3 right now, but it's kind of similar for 2008 as well. On the sharing tab of the folder, it's simple. Do not share this folder, share this folder. You click share this folder, you can type in a share name. Of course, this is what they connect to, either in your login script, group policy, or however they connect to the share. This is the name that you assign here. You can put a comment if you want. I never put a comment because I make the share name descriptive of what the share is for. And the first choice you have on the screen is user limit, maximum allowed, or allow this number of users. I've never ever seen anyone set allow this number of users. So you can leave that on maximum allowed. And you've got permissions on this page. With this permissions are for or share permissions. So There's a difference between share permissions and NTFS security. And that's what confuses a lot of people just getting in to do any kind of server support.
Hey Matt, if I were to give a name to the data drive and put data $, what does that $sign at the end of the share name mean?
A $sign at the end of any share name means it's hidden when browsing. So if you went to network places, you browse to the server, you might see a user share, you might see an accounting share, but if you had data $sign, you would not see the data share. So it just hides it from your view. Some people like to use these hidden shares as a way of security. I'm not sure how secure it is, but it's a way just so users won't click on it. So in your login script or your group policy, when you map to that share, you got to include that $sign on it. So that just hides the share from users that are browsing.
Right, and what Matt's saying is correct. It's not very secure because there's tools, and I believe if you do net space share, it will even show you the share, or if you were to browse to the console. So you can't see it if you know where to look, but for the average user, and they won't know that it's there. So
yeah, I've had some places where they just don't want some users seeing drives that they don't have access to. Normally, in our login, if you're using O3, or it's different if you're using login scripts or if you're using group policy to assign your shares to users. Before, we would use login scripts, and I didn't feel like making 30 different login scripts, so the login script was the same for everybody, but when they clicked on it, they would get access denied. So this was a way for her, she felt more secure if it just wasn't shown when they browsed. So the $sign is what we did on those.
cool.
So on the share permissions, this is, well, let's define what share permissions are as opposed to NTFS permissions, because these are the two kind of security types that you can apply to folders. Okay, share permissions, you only have 3 permissions you can set, and share permissions are only applied to the share itself. You can't go apply to a specific folder unless you share it separately or files underneath it. So this just applies to the share itself. And it's just full control, change, read. That's the only 3 options you have for share permissions. Now, another thing with share permissions, it only works across the network, meaning across the share. If you have somebody that can access the server locally, share permissions have no effect on that person. So I see a lot of places mistakenly rely on share permissions only, full control everyone, but then they make the same mistake of making everybody domain administrators so they can log on to the server they wanted to and access this data. So share permissions only to the share, they don't work locally, and there's limited permissions you can set. NTFS permissions you can apply to subfolders, files, folders, down to the file level. You can assign different permissions on these resources, and they work across the network. They work locally, so you don't have that security feature right there, that security hole. Not that you ever want users logging into your file server, but sometimes they might. Now, generally, you don't want to use share permissions to control file access. You want to use security permissions, NTFS permissions. There's lots of reasons for that. Mainly, share permissions have been around for a long time. NTFS permissions are relatively newer compared to share permissions. So they have many more attributes you can assign to resources. So that's a whole book, but just use NTFS permissions. So what we do is when we share a folder, I'm going to allow full control to either everyone or to the group that needs access to it, but they're going to have full control. And there's a difference here. So let's just say I did full control everyone on the share.
Okay.
And the everyone group, of course, is everyone. That it's any user. You don't even need authentication. It's a bit set to everyone full control. It's anyone authenticated or not. Everyone. So if I have my computer that wasn't joined to the domain, I could still browse to this share and access it without being prompted for anything because everyone's full control. Now there's authenticated users and other security groups where you do have to authenticate, but everyone means everyone. So if you apply everyone full control to that, and I'm walking through this on the share right now, then there's a tab on that same folder properties called security. In here are NTFS permissions, and that's where you want to set your permissions. Now, standard practice is you don't want to assign permissions here to users. You want to assign to groups. So if I have somebody call me and they say, hey, I want a new share for this project that we're having, Project X. Fine. I'll create the new folder. I'll share it as Project X. I'm going to give everyone full control, or I'm going to give the group I create full control. I'm going to call that group Project X. We've talked about creating groups before, but I'm going to create a security group called Project X, and in the description, I'm going to put allows access to the Project X share. So later on, I know what it's for. So in the permissions for the Project X, I'm going to allow the Project X group. No other groups, just the Project X group. So now, if I have a new user that needs to be added, I can add him to that group and he's got permissions.
Yes, and the reason what Matt's saying is makes so much sense. I walked into a job once, and they didn't use groups as Matt is describing. They used individuals to apply these permissions. And let me tell you, that's a complete nightmare. So when Bob left the company and they hired Mary, and they said, Lalo, go ahead and give Mary the same permissions Bob has. So now it was a nightmare. I said, well, Bob had the permissions to 25 different shares, but if you have groups and Bob was in the accounting group, I said, all right, Mary, you're not part of the accounting group. Now my job is done. So much easier when you are using groups like Matt is describing.
Right. And that's the nightmare situation, given the same rights. Well, okay, so I have to go to every folder on your server and see what permissions are set, because I've seen many times, well, and this is one thing you definitely don't want to do, is in a nested folder, 10 folders deep, you change permissions on that folder to have a couple people have access only. You have no way of knowing when you change permissions on all these subfolders what the permissions are unless you go to the folder and do properties and look at them. And I've seen that too many times, and there's no easy way to fix that, unfortunately, because let's say I go to a folder under my data share and I browse 3 folders deep and I want to change the permissions on a folder in there. And then, well, let's just use that example, and this is common. So I got a call just the other day. Somebody says, I want to change the permissions on this folder. Let's call it Project X. Only these 3 people should have access to it. Well, if I just went to the folder and did it, it's going to be hard for someone to go behind me and see what I did. If they see a group that says allows access to Project X, I know what they did. So when you go to that folder, you can right-click on that folder, and this is maybe 3 folders down, and you can go to Properties on that folder. And here, you can click on the Security tab. Now remember, you can't set sharing permissions on this subfolder because sharing permissions only apply to the share directly, not to subfolders. So on the subfolder they want to change permissions to, go to Security, click on the Advanced tab. Now here you've got the thing you're looking for is allow inheritable permissions from the parent to propagate to this object and all child objects. You uncheck that button. When you uncheck that button, you'll get a security notice, and basically it says, do you want to copy the permissions, do you want to remove permissions, or cancel? Click copy here. Don't click remove. Because
always click copy.
Always click copy. Because when you click copy, you didn't actually change anything. You still have it there. And let's say you had 4 groups that inherited from the parent folder. I can just remove those groups, add in the new group. because things like administrators are going to have access to it. I don't want to change that. I want my
Right.
administrators to have access. There's going to be creator owner. There's going to be system. If you click remove, that's all gone. And some funny things are going to happen.
Especially with your backups.
Yeah.
You learn that the hard way when you're using backup exact the whatever software that you're using, and you look at your logs and see the backups failed. Why? Because like Matt's saying, you've removed those permissions. Now the user account that's used for, or the service account used for the backup, can't even access the share to even back it up because you took him or the account out.
Right. Now, let's say you have your data drive. You have a RAID 1, let's say, in a server, and that's local disk E, let's say. You right click on that and go to properties. I'm sorry, go to sharing. In here, you're going to have a security tab. And this is when we talk about inheritance, when you create a new folder under the E drive, by default, it's going to inherit the parent permissions. So whatever you have set on the E drive itself is what new shares will start off with. So pretty much every time you make a new folder under E you want to share, you're going to have to do this. Uncheck inherit permissions because you don't want it to inherit those permissions. You want to set your own permissions on your own share. So still do copy, take out the other groups or users and add the ones you want in, leaving system, creator, owner, and administrators. Now inheritance, and like we used the example for Project X, this was a one-time thing this customer called me for. If this was constant, where they kept saying change this folder, change this folder, change this folder, I don't want to change folders constantly because inevitably something's going to happen, and now I've got 40 folders with different permissions, and I have to go find the folder and hunt for it and see what's happened to it. If this was constant, I might make a new share called project or projects and just assign the permissions to the share directly, and they can create whatever folder they want assigned to projects. So you want to avoid changing all these permissions to subfolders because that's not good. That's what separate shares are for.
Right. I mean, and I've seen the companies where they have, 100 shares, but they're unmanaged in such a way where it's 100 shares, but like Matt's saying, opposed to having only 10 shares in each subfolder and having, its own set of permissions, it just becomes an administrative nightmare.
It is. I've seen people who just have the standard share, one share, and everything is under there, and the permissions are set all different ways in all kind of subfolders. They had constant problems with accessing folders and files, and of course, when we were called in, we had to fix all this stuff. So, and the way to fix this actually is a feature of NTFS because they didn't know who should have access to what folders either. So there's another thing you need to know. Well, let me go back to the share and permissions. When you apply both share permissions and NTFS permissions, if you're using both of them for some reason, I don't know why you want to, the most restrictive takes precedence when you're combining share and NTFS. If you just have everyone full control on the share, you can apply NTFS. You know where to look to see what the permissions are. Now, if you're and of course deny overwrites everything else. So if there's a deny, that takes precedence over everything else. And this can run into problems sometimes if you have Bob as a member of the marketing group, and you have marketing group for some reason as denied on a share. Bob can't have access because he's a member of that group.
Because that is the most restrictive permission.
Right. I like to create groups for my share. So if I've got a share called marketing, I want a group called marketing. But these people can make things difficult. Well, can this user have access, but not this one and not this one? So you got to kind of be careful. And you want to use deny sparingly. If you have NTFS permissions, there's no reason to deny, because if you're not allowed, you won't have access. So at the instance of deny, you allow the marketing group access to a share, but Bob shouldn't, so you deny Bob. In that case, you do want to use a name because you don't want to deny a whole group. But you want to use deny sparingly. I've been to places where they had deny everywhere. and it was a complete mess, as a lot of these things are. If you go behind somebody who doesn't understand permissions, it's a big job to fix. Big job.
Right. And I don't think that you should use undeny. I mean, for the 13 years or so that I've been doing it, I don't really use the deny.
Yeah, it's very rare that I use it as well, because I create certain groups for the shares.
Mm-hmm.
It's only in a rare instance where I've created a group called marketing, and I've got all the marketing people in it, but then they don't want Bob to have access to it. Well, I might use a marketing group for a few things, so I don't want to create a separate marketing share with 40 people. In that case, I would deny Bob, but that's rare. Very rare. I've only done it a handful of times, and it was for specific reasons. And normally, we're normally going to call to deny one person. You're going to get a call a week later saying you can disable his account now.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's usually a temporary thing. Now, a good tool if you want to see what permissions the user has, you can go down to a specific file on the server. Right-click on it, go to Properties, go to the Security tab. I think it's Security tab. Right-click on it, go to Properties, go to Security, go to Advanced, and in here you got a button called Effective Permissions. So what it does is, whatever file or folder you selected, you select a user or a group, and then it tells you what rights they have to that folder or file, which can be handy sometimes if you want to see what's going on. Because I've seen this before too. You might have 10 folders deep, and they can access the third layer, the fifth layer, the eighth layer, but they might have been granted access to the fourth subfolder level and the seventh if they go directly to it. So if you go down to the bottom, it can get really diluted when you talk about these permissions. I think the main point is avoid setting permissions on subfolders if at all possible. What do you think, Lalo?
Oh no, and I agree. And if you haven't walked into an environment where me and Matt are describing, and I mean, when I first started doing NTFS, the permissions, and you know, I got it wrong the first couple of times, but it took me a couple of long nights and hard lessons learned to say, okay, let me do it right on this time. So
yeah, if I was going to train somebody who didn't know anything about it, I'd show them create a share. Share permissions are everyone full control. Whoever needs access, we're going to create a group. We're going to give that group NTFS permissions, and we're done.
Mm-hmm.
That's the basics of it.
The first job I ever had was for a small business, and we had maintained just 2 servers, and the NTFS permissions were all configured incorrectly. But luckily, they bought 2 brand new servers, and that was my opportunity to get it right. So you know, I did some research and did some reading, and we got it right, and all those administrative nightmares all went away.
Yes, and it's a good opportunity at that point to find out who needs access to what, because when they come back and they say this person needs access to this, these people need access to this, well, that's creating your groups for you.
Mm-hmm.
So you can create groups from that. Now, like you said, Lalo, if you walk into some place with this mess of permissions, how do you fix it? What's the easiest way to fix it? I'm putting you on the spot here. I know the way I do it.
If they depending how big the company was, I would just take all the individual rights away and see who screams.
Well, that's true. But sometimes, remember, they got these things where one folder is not inheriting permissions.
That's true.
One person took ownership of this file or this share. It's a big mess. So even then, you might change at the top level and say to propagate down, but you've got so many folders that are set not to inherit from the parent, so that doesn't affect any of those.
Right.
Which is a pain. So a user called me the other day, and this is one of those cases where she wanted me to show her how to set permissions, and I showed her once years ago. She called me saying nobody can access this particular folder. and she had it completely messed up. Like 4 levels deep, she changed it on all different levels, different things. I was like, oh my goodness. So there's a feature with NTFS when you move files, and this is important. If you take a file or a folder that has permissions on it and you want to move it, the permissions may or may not change. If you move that file or folder to the same partition, it's going to keep the permissions that it had. If you move it to a new partition, a new volume, or a new drive, it's going to take the target folder's permissions. So in this case, what I did is I created a new folder on a separate drive, copied it or moved it all over there. So it took the permissions of the parent that I created, deleted the one she had, copied it all back, and set the permissions the right way. So I didn't want to go through all the subfolders and see what she did.
Yep, that's the one way of doing it.
And then, of course, she said, well, that's what you showed me to do. I said,
Right.
is that why it didn't work?
Yeah.
Now, I also, of course, when you share these things, it depends on how you want your users to access it. There's login scripts. There's group policy, which is a completely different thing on how to distribute these shares. So we won't get into that. But the process that I do is, like I said, share, everyone full control, permissions for the group, and then add it to the scripts or group policy. And that's pretty much it. And don't be afraid to tell users when they call you, I want to change the permissions in this folder, and this folder, and this folder. Say no. What are we trying to do?
Yes.
Because I don't want to change these with what your thought process was. So what are we trying to do?
Exactly. And you will find out after just talking to him. Say, oh, so you want Bob not to have access? Yeah. Then we'll check bots. Okay, thanks.
Right. Even if it's for one person, especially for a new share, this person is the only one who needs access to it. I just need a new share just for him. Well, one, if it's just for him, tell him to put it in his user folder.
Right. I was referring to like a lot of times they'll talk about an individual and you ask who this person is, like, oh, Bob is no longer in a marketing group. Okay, I think about the marketing group and mission accomplished. We're done. But sometimes users can't comprehend how groups and permissions work, and that's why Matt's saying do some, investigation, do some research, and because the only thing the end user wants is their end result. They want Bob no longer to be able to access that share or that folder. Yeah.
Or something like you said, talk to them, find out what they want. Somebody might say, look, there's a folder in the public drive, and I'm the only one that should have access to it. Okay. Well, if you're the only one who needs it, let's put it in user folder. It doesn't. Okay. They don't know it can be moved to their user folder. Plus, they probably forgot that only they can access their user folder.
Right, and that's what every environment should have. It what Matt's saying, the folder that only the user and administrators can have access to. But Bob can write a file or write data to this share, but Mary can get to it, or Sue can't get to it. The administrator can, but only Bob can.
Yep. Another thing I get is a user will call me and say, I want to allow Bob access to my user share. Okay. So Bob should have access to everything in your user share. No, just this folder. Okay, well, that's different. So yeah. I don't like changing permissions on the user share. I say, well, if it's not just for you, we need to create a share for it separately and move it out of your user share.
Agreed.
Because I see that a lot too. The user shares get all messed up. And so it depends on what they want to do. If it's both of them, I might make a new share. I may put it at the top level of another share. I'm not going to put it in some kind of subfolder. I don't mind doing a top level. So you got data and then Project X. I'll change that, but I don't like changing subfolders.
Right.
But I might create a new share completely, so where it maps for them directly. So, and then even though it's only 2 users, I'm going to create a group for it. Just because later on, oh, let's add this third person too. Well, now it's easy to add that person. Just add them to the group. So, and like Lalo said, it's a nightmare. That's when it comes in handy when they say make Mary like Bob.
Yeah, exactly. then if you ever want to see what kind of mess that you might have, 'cause NTFS permissions, if you don't understand, I mean they could become very difficult. I always create like a user account, or I would jump on somebody's the PC and start browsing the network. Oh, he can get here. Oh, he can get to the president's user drive. And you're like, really? And that's when you know when you have a problem and when you have to correct it.
Yeah, right.
So,
And what I see a lot is on the data share, I'll see a lot of user folders in there, Mary, Bob, Joe. And I ask them, what are these folders
yeah.
for? And they say, well, that's Joe's user folder. No. Joe has a U drive. Everyone's U drive or Z drive, whatever we pick, is for them. This is under P, which says public on server.
Mm-hmm.
And as any public place, everybody's welcome. So just because you create a folder called Bob doesn't mean only Bob can get there.
Yeah.
And of course, they go, oh my goodness, really? There's sensitive information in there. Well, that goes back to user training, which of course we know was almost impossible. But I do tell them, everyone, when we create, especially a new server, or if we're fixing it, everyone's got their own U drive. I'll even show the office manager and owner, if I need to. We'll go to one person's computer. I'll browse to the share itself, because remember, everybody, small business server by default is going to have your folder. So I might say Mary on whatever. It's not everybody else, it's just Mary. But if they browse to the user share directly, they'll see all the names. They click on Joe, access denied. Click on Mark, access denied. Click on theirs, they're in. And I show them that's how it works. This is for the user share. Now, if they forget, they forget, but it happens. There's only so much you can do.
Agreed.
Now, sometimes you might see a group called folder operators, or I think it was in server 03 or small, but it may be in OA too, folder operators. So some users or the office managers want access to everything. And there was one group, I want to say folder operators. You could just put them in that group. And that was a default group, just like creator owner system, that had access to everything. And I do that, I might put that at the top level of the user share, because you're not going to remember to change that right every time you create a new user. Because by default, new user folder is going to be that user only. So if you create it to the top, it would go down so Mary can have access to everybody's user folder.
Right. And you might ask the question, why would you ever do that? One environment that I was in, there was a department manager, and all their user drives were in the same each folder had all the employees in that department, so that manager had access to all of his employees' user folders. Like, the reason being, the employee was out in the field, they can get that the record or wherever they have required. So that's a scenario where that might happen.
And I've had people who just said, well, no, this is my business. They shouldn't have access. I shouldn't be accessing that to anything. It's all my data. It's all on my server. I don't want to be denied. Wow. So they got that attitude, and rightfully so. It is. They shouldn't have. If they want to click on it, they own the server. They can do what they want. So.
Oh, sure, but that's being
in a small business. That's what I find happens most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
They want other people denied to them, of course, but they don't want to be denied to anybody else. So I run into that more than anything else. Where now, of course, they have the administrator account too. They could log in as administrator and browse that way, but if the owner tells you I want access to all user shares, I just give it to them. I'm not going to argue with them. Okay. I took talk about how viruses can spread and this and that, but they can spread through other shares too. And if anything, that's just more to scare them, so I don't have to change the permissions.
I know. Now, some people, they don't. Do you give users full control, or do you give them modify, or what's the difference in between both?
Well, if it's a public share, I'm going to give them full control. Now, of course, you have to explain to them that full control means that they can delete the data, because they don't understand. They think they can access it. and they don't realize that full control means deleting. So you have to really talk to the people who are the decision makers and find out how they want this data controlled. Some programs, if they're going to write to the share, need full control. Even if you give modify, some programs are going to give errors.
Right, because I believe the difference between modify and full control, you can change permissions, and there's one other thing that you can do with full control that you can't do with the modify, and you can take ownership of files. That's the other thing.
Yeah, and ownership that can be a problem, but I had somebody the other day took ownership to a bunch of files and changed the permissions so no one can access the files. And that was for the whole data share. They took ownership and took away full control. I'm not sure why they did it. So they took away full control, and then things weren't working correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, I had to explain to her, well, full control means they can do that kind of stuff. So, Now, you might wonder when you're browsing to a folder, let's say you're browsing to a folder in a share, you right-click on it, you go to Properties, and you go to the Security tab. You'll notice that if you click on a user, you got an Allow column and a Deny column. You'll see that the Allow column it's got checks in it, but it's grayed out. And you can't really change anything right there. What the grayed out, of course, means is that it's inheriting permissions from a parent folder. And the only way to change that is to go into Advanced and set not to allow inheritable permissions, and then change the permissions that way. Otherwise, you might be able to add permissions, but it's going to inherit what it's already there. So that's what the grayed out means on those files. I've had people kind of curious about that. Have you seen that before? I'm sure you have a lot of
people.
Yeah,
sure. And I'm trying to bring up a picture so I can show it there, but it's not coming up for some reason. But yes, you are correct. What Matt's saying again, just a brief overview. If the inheritance is modified throughout the whole entire folder structure through inheritance, if you go 3 folders down, you can't change that. Okay, it's inheriting from that top folder.
So right, you might see if you click on like this is I'm looking at one that's administrators. It's grayed out. I click on it on a group, but the group is not grayed out. So the group is actually white with check marks in it. That means that it's not inheriting from the parent, but this was set to add these permissions. So grayed out means inherited. No gray box means it was assigned to that folder specifically, not inherited.
Right, and I'm showing it on the screen now. You can see the read and execute list folder contents and read. They're all grayed out. They cannot be modified or changed unless you go to the Advanced tab like Matt had described.
And see, in this instance, by default, I'm sure most drives by default are going to give most drives when you create a new folder. Let me go look at that.
Yeah, because it is different across the operating systems.
Yeah, if I got a data drive here with the default permissions, if I do, at least on a small business server, a new folder is going to have by default user group as read and execute, list folder contents, and a few special permissions. But that's by default. If you create a new folder on the root of a drive, that's what it's going to give you. And more than likely, that's not what you want. So that's again why in a new folder you're going to go to Advanced and you're going to uncheck to allow inheritable permissions, because I want to set my own share permission or NTFS permissions on this share. But again, a new folder is inheriting what the parent drive has set for security. Everyone's inherits from somebody else. The most highest level is a drive, and down from there.
Right, and like Matt had mentioned, I don't really break the inheritance. If I have to, I just create a new share. I mean, I just don't like to break the inheritance.
Off the drive, right?
Right.
I don't change the drive either. Yeah. I'll create a folder and then say, no, this is not inherited. Here's what the permissions should be.
All right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You don't want to do that because then you're going to have all kind of problems.
Yeah.
Because then something else is probably inheriting that, and that's going to break that. It can get, inheritance can get a mess. All of it can be a mess, but just
And
the
you
ma
and you would know
the
rather the quickly when you hit apply and okay, and you wait about 5 seconds and you sip that delicious Waffle House coffee and your phone goes off the hook.
yeah. And see, this girl last week, I think it was last week, she thought she did it right, but then she started getting calls from everybody because she changed. What did she change? She changed the permissions on a folder that was holding all the active projects.
Okay.
So when everybody got cut off from their projects, they weren't too happy. And she's a central point of contact, so they called her and she called me saying, I think I messed up the permissions.
Like, okay.
So that's when I had to say, show me what you did. And she said she spent hours trying to set the right permissions. And I said, well, this shouldn't take hours. Show me what you did. So she showed me, she went to this folder, then she went to this folder, then she went to this folder. I was like, oh my goodness. I said, how long would it take you to undo this? And she goes, oh my God, it'll take me longer than it took me to do it. So I said, okay, well, I'll bail you out this time, but next time don't change permissions. So,
Yeah.
a quick copy out. And that's true. You change it, they're gonna know right away. But the main, and I don't want to. This is what I see. And this is what I see most times. Shares not given access to groups, which you want to do. Too many permissions shared on subfolders, and too many times users are trying to use public shares for user folders or user folders for public shares, and not knowing that a new share can be created. So you need to ask them what they're trying to accomplish. It doesn't matter if you have 100 shares. If you need a new share, create a new share. Now, of course, you can't map all those shares. You can only map what, 22 shares?
Already?
There's only so many alphabet letters in the alphabet. So you can't B, C, D, or G. G through Z. That's about as many you can map at once.
Wow. If you have that many shares, man.
Oh, I have people that are running out.
Really?
Yep. But that's mainly accountants.
Oh.
Because accountants love their shares. And there's some specific tax software that it's just easier if each year has its own share. And they go back 13 years or 14 years. So each one has a share.
A little tool that I want to share. When I first went inside an environment, and there's a tool from sysinternals, especially when I ran the Windows 2003 environment called Share Enum. I think it's called Share. It stands for enumerator. But anyways, if you run this as an administrator or account, what it'll do is scan your entire network and show you the shares that exist and also the permissions.
Oh, that's nice.
I used this years ago. I don't know how in the 2008 environment, Matt, how effective this is, but that's one of the first things I would do, and it would pretty much just map out all of the shares, and I went there, and tried to correct them as I seen fit. Once I put the strategy.
And I think that's based off in the resource kit. There's something similar.
Okay.
I've never had to use it, although I do remember a job years and years and years ago when I was relatively new. A customer asked me to tell them who had access to what, and now that's like one of those. Hey, I got a quick question for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, most questions are quick, but it's the answers that take a while.
Agree.
They say, "Yeah, can you just find out who has access to everything?"
All right. And for those who are listening to the audio podcast, is ShareEnum by sysinternals. So
yeah, anything from sysinternals is going to be good.
Awesome.
That's a good, yeah, good tools. So that was a nightmare because they had a big mess, and it took weeks to clean that up. And had I known about that tool, it would have been a little bit easier, but I'm not sure. That tool looks good for administrators. I'm not sure how it would be easy to read for users, because she wanted me to say this person has access to this folder. She wanted it broken down a little differently. So I had to make Excel spreadsheets and all kind of stuff to show her who had access to what. And of course I said, okay, this folder I did like 2 weeks ago. So this is how it was 2 weeks ago. I don't know
Oh,
who's
okay.
changed what since then. So I can't generate this in 10 minutes, I told her. So
Um, and also from the command line again, in the event that you do have admin rights, if you do net space view / your domain name, it should show you all the shares within your domain, even if they have that $ or not. So at least you know the shares that are out there. One environment that I was in, Matt, people like to create their own shares on their own local PCs, and so I ran this tool and I found about 25 shares where everybody went Bob, a $. And these folks were a little bit more craftier than the average like a user, but that's what they did.
so what's that command?
Net space view, then / the domain name, and it should bring up the shares within your domain.
Let's see. Because yeah, I do hate it when I go someplace and I just get on a computer and I see the C drive shared as the C drive shared C $, but I see the C drive shared with another share, which is very, very annoying. Now there's one thing also, you can assign different shares to the same folder with
Yes.
different permissions.
Yes.
That's one thing we didn't mention. So you might have a folder called Project X. You can share it as Project X. But you can also share it with another name and have different permissions to it as well, if that was needed. Have you ever done that? I've never done it. I've seen it can be done.
No, I just never had a use for it, to be honest.
If anything, I think it would cause more confusion.
Yeah.
Because you don't know unless you hit that little down arrow for share name that there's another share name.
Yeah.
So you might change permissions on the first one you see, but it's not a common habit for me to click that down arrow and see what else is listed there. So that's nothing to watch out for. And I do remember that because it's happened to me where I've changed the one that I saw, but didn't change the other one.
Yeah. I think it becomes more of a, did you know that the share is also named, I love ketchup. And you're like, what?
It's going to help for troubleshooting because you might say, man, I know I changed.
Yeah.
I know I changed those permissions. And then that. Now you can also right click in Server 03, you can right click my computer, go to Manage, and click on the Shares tab. Of course, that'll list all the shares on that computer.
Yes.
With their paths, because some shares, they might say change the permission to the Mass 90 share, and I go look, where's the Mass 90 share? I'm
Exactly.
looking. So you click on the C drive, the D drive, and I was like, what is this? So, and plus the share name may be different than the folder name. They may share the Mass 90 folder as accounting, and they say what they see is accounting on server name drive S or something. And say, well, yeah, change it on accounting. Well, accounting's not the name of the folder. So if you're looking for, you see folder called Mass 90, but you don't, unless you go right click and do properties. So right click, manage, go to shares. It'll tell you the share name and the path to the folder.
Or what you can do also is if you, again, I love the command line. If you have map drives, I believe if you go jump up the command and type in net space use and hit enter, it should show you if I had an H drive and whatever that drive is mapped to.
That shows what they're currently, that on the client, right?
Yes,
that shows
right. On a client end. Especially in an environment where you have so many users that map their own drives, and before you want to reformat the drive, or if you're going to wipe the profile and you go, I wonder what this P drive is mapped to. And I mean, that has saved my butt plenty of times because I piped that out to like a text file, and then it's like, oh, okay, like your H drive was mapped to like server share name. So
yep, and I actually had to use that today.
Oh yeah,
not for a share. I had to use it for a printer.
Oh,
because it'll also show any LPT1 that are mapped somewhere else.
That's right.
So I had to use that because somebody said they couldn't print a new user account and it wasn't mapped over to LPT1. So it'll show anything mapped. And I was using that little tool on a thing right here. It's actually just so we get it. It's actually NetSpace View slash domain name colon and then what the domain name is.
Right, right. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, and I just ran it a couple places. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. That's pretty neat
So,
because after a while, I get sick and tired of clicking on folders. And you're like, there has to be some way in the net view, the command, just Google it. There's plenty of documentation, net space view, and that will make your life a little bit easier when you're researching like your network to see what shares are out there already.
right. I'll show you the yeah. So here it says server name and remark, and I can see the shares. Now it doesn't do the machine you're running from, just the ones on the network, right? Because when I ran it here, it just scanned the network. It didn't scan the local machine.
I'm on a local PC, so I can't run the command and see what you're saying. But that does have plenty of syntax, so
Yeah,
I'll definitely
it's
check it
pretty
out.
neat. Yeah, you'd be surprised how many times you get that everybody shares every printer, everybody shares every drive they have, their C drive, their CD-ROM drive. They share everything.
Talking about admin shares, what are those, Matt?
Well, those are hidden shares too. So your C drive by default is shared C dollar sign. So I use this a lot when I'm doing if I get a new user, they log in and they say, "Hey, my icons aren't on this desktop." And if we don't have roaming profiles, which hopefully we're not,
Please.
but they can say, or like today, the same user who printer wasn't mapped. She said, "Well, I'm supposed to have a icon here for the Sage software." So I just did / username / C dollar sign. Now I can see their hard drive, their C drive. So I browsed to the other user folder, copied the shortcut, pasted it on her desktop, and I said, "Okay, check again. Is it there? Oh, it's here now. I must have missed it." So it's a good way, and I'll actually use it for virus cleanup. I'll have them reboot their computer. I connect to the server. I connect to the hidden share that way, and I can browse for the typical application folders and
Oh, sure.
delete that file. Um,
It it's a great way, especially in a networking like environment. You want to get to a PC and not use RDP or wherever remote the control tool. Just browse to like the C drive, create shortcuts, copy folders over. And for example, in my job now, when I have to install applications, a lot of times I just browse to the C drive, copy the data that I need already, and then I call them up and I just run it and I'm done. And they go, "Man, that was really quick." Yeah, because I took the last 5 minutes like copying stuff over. So,
yep.
there's a question in the chat room, sir. Can you explain if ownership is important?
It is important depending on what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Normally, there's no reason to change ownership.
None.
Um, unless somebody wanted to take ownership to change the permissions, um, there's really no reason to it. And sometimes you have to have some person has to have ownership for certain programs to work. Normally, it's not the one person. I know user profiles, the ownership has to be either, I think it's the user or the local or the administrator group. Is that right?
Right, because I've had this happen like in the past where somebody gets crafty and they take a folder and because they had full control and they they go ahead and take ownership and say, "Lalo, haha, you have no access and I can't access on the folder." And you go, "Great, how do you do?" Don't forget, I'm a domain admin, right? So I go back in there and take ownership and I teach you a lesson now. In fact, I'm gonna use that access, that deny check just for Bob there, so he can stop messing with me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So the owner can change files and lock other people out, and,
right.
and then it. Well, actually, yeah. But you don't. And all the times I've been doing this, I've never found the need to change ownership, other than when a user takes ownership and I have to take it back because they've messed up the permissions, and you can't change your permissions unless you're the owner.
Right, and that I will say that's the only time I even look at the ownership permissions, because you will go try to make a change, and it says, and you can't do it, and you go, "What?" And then you find out that Bob over there had a beer during lunch and took ownership of the entire folder.
Yeah.
Then you just take it back. So.
And because he might want to change permissions or do something crazy with it. So usually it's done because users are trying to do it themselves and don't understand what it's for.
Because, and I think it becomes a problem, Matt, because most users don't understand modify or, read and execute, but they, take ownership. I want that. Checkbox. Okay.
Feels important. I'm the owner.
Yeah.
I own this data. It's my folder.
Oh.
Yeah, normally if users didn't change things, everything would work great. But of course, that's part of your security, or what the business wants for security. You may not want to give everybody full control on the share. You may have some kind of other thing that you want to do, or you can also, with all these special permissions for NTFS, one of the special permissions is take ownership. You could deny or remove the take ownership right away, so no one else could take ownership.
Or if I wanted, and there have been cases, and I forget why I did this, where I said, okay, Matt needs ownership of my file, so you can assign the ownership of a file. For those that are watching, listening, understand that we're giving a brief overview of NTFS, the permissions. If you wanted to go really crazy about it, there's all type of documentation. There's the permissions that will touch very lightly, because they can become a different show. So again, this is the idea to give you the foundation of the NTFS permissions. So there's plenty of documentation.
Right. This is by no means exhaustive, because you can't do exhaustive in roughly an hour. But you can get basics if you want to get into servers, or if you're doing servers and want to learn more. This is the basics. And some of the pitfalls, like I said, I've seen so many people try and make the users happy with what they request, when it can be accomplished using other methods, other shares, with groups, that kind of thing. So just use those basic tips and you'll be okay for 99% of all the shares you have to administer.
Oh, sure. And what Matt's saying is exactly right. The best way to go, if you can control it, give everyone share. Give the everyone group full control on their share, and lock everyone down on the NTFS. Easiest way to go. If you manage all your shares that way, on top of that, assign permissions to groups. The accounting group, the sales group, the engineering group. Assign people to those groups. Makes your life a lot easier, because when someone, and the headache it comes, like, I know that we've been talking about this, but when Bob gets promoted to a different department, now you have two concerns. What the rights does he need to, now he's now in sales, and what rights do I need to take away because he was in marketing? And you'll be there the whole entire day playing Inspector Gadget, like trying to find these rights.
Right. And if you ask him, what did you have access to before? Everything. Well, everything he knows of.
Right.
So it might be overkill to have one group per share, but it's going to make your life easier in the long run. It's very clear. This is what you have access to. This is what you have access to. Go down the list. You can actually go, when they say, hey, create a new user, Bob, and you ask him, okay, what does Bob need access to? Well, if they tell you the accounting folder, you just know what groups to put him in. It's so much easier.
Or I can go to the Bob user account and do a right click and go to properties and go to member of. It'll show me Bob is a member of these 4 groups. Great. I now know what Mary needs access to. So your life becomes so much easier. So
yeah, and if you do go into a mess, you need to fix it because I've gone to many places who have these kind of messes, and right off the bat, I can tell they've had issues. And I know it's painful, but this is they have these problems. They probably don't have groups. It's time to do account cleanup, create groups, clean up all the permissions, and it's going to take a while, but in the end, it's going to make everything go smoother, and they'll be happier because they won't have access denied when they're not supposed to be. And they probably don't know that what happens most of the time is people have access to stuff they shouldn't, and nobody knows unless Mary is sitting at Bob's desk and see Bob's click on a folder, she's not going to know Bob has access when he shouldn't. They assume that everything is secure, so it's up to you to know if it is or not.
Yeah, sure. And there are things that if you want to go more detailed, they're called special permissions. And you might be asking, what the hell is that? What special permissions are? Okay, you have your basics. You have your read, your modify, your write, your full control. These permissions are a combination of other permissions put together to create full control, to create the modify, to create write. If you go under advanced and go on this, I think it's the special permissions off the top of my head. So excuse me. You can see what those permissions are made of and get even more detailed. I don't ever do this. I don't know if you do, Matt.
Oh no.
But I mean, it just becomes insane. So
I do not. Now, I did have to do it once, and it was on a terminal server that hosted a lot of different companies. It was a special circumstance, and the only thing I had to do was the traverse folder special attribute. Traverse folder means if you have permissions at the top level and there's a folder they want to get to on the 5th level, they could go to the 5th level directly if they knew the full path. But let's say they didn't know the folder path. They just knew it was under this main folder. But if they click on it, they get access denied. But if you want them to see the traverse the folders, meaning I want to click on data, and then I want to see the 10 folders below there. Then I want to click on the one I want to click on and get to the next folder. So the traverse folder, execute file, and the list folder, you can assign rights to, so they can pretty much drill down to the folders to get to what they want to get to. Now, I think, if I remember correctly, I couldn't have them go to the exact folder because the folder was changing names for some reason. I think that one company was changing folder names, and the person could browse. I don't remember the exact specific, but they had to drill down. So that's the only time I've had to give special permissions, so they could drill down into the folders to get to their folder. And in the end, the folder they had enough rights to do what they wanted to do.
yeah.
But that was one time in 15 years that I've had to do it.
A rare event. I mean, I don't know about you guys that are listening. I would rather deal with permissions such as full control, the modify, read and execute, read and write, and list folder contents. What type of special permissions are there? Full control, traverse folder, execute file, list folder, read data, read attributes, read extended attributes, create files, write data, create folders. I'm not gonna go on and on, but there's about 10 more. Hey, unless you're just extremely bored at work, have at it. So,
right. That's, I'm sure, for those permissions may be used in some environments.
no, sure, I agree.
But in my environment, small businesses, I don't have a need for any of that stuff.
Even
I'm not going to have a user call me and say, look, I want to deny him to read the extended attributes.
I mean, even me, and we work in an environment for about 4,000 users, we don't even use the special permissions. I mean, there are small little occasions for it, for, whatever the reason. But again, they're there for a reason, and there are some environments where you might need to use these permissions. But if you're going this deep, you pretty are knowledgeable about NTFS permissions already, if you're going this deep.
Yeah, if I had a user call and ask me to deny or be able to write extended attributes, I'm going to go, okay, it's done.
Man.
And see if they can tell if it's done or not. And the simpler you keep these things, the easier it is to be able to troubleshoot. So if you go and apply all these special permissions and all these crazy permissions on different subfolders, it's going to be a nightmare when they want you to actually change something.
I agree.
Oops, I think I marked somebody as junk mail here in my random typing on my computer.
That's not good. All right, man. Is there a topic that or an area that we just didn't cover? We cover admin shares, NTFS, sharing permissions, copying data from one partition to another, inheritance.
So let's see. Do we said that the most restrictive is applied when you're combining share and NTFS. Deny overrides everything else. Um, hidden shares. Yeah, I think that's pretty much the basics.
Now, the combining of permissions, like Matt is saying, that will drive you nuts. Here's an example. Bob is part of marketing. He has full access to the project at the folder. Bob is also part of the accounting group, and the accounting group has read only. And you drive yourself nuts saying, why can Bob just have read only? At the end of the day, like Matt had described, since he's the most restrictive permission applies, and that's why Bob can only do read only. So troubleshooting. In fact, let's talk about that, Matt. And how do you troubleshoot the permissions? Like I said, Bob would do in that scenario where Bob calls me up and says, I can't write anything. I look at his group membership. Then I look at the permissions applied to that share where he's trying to access.
Right. I start looking at his groups and see if he can access it or not, or where he gets access denied. So check the groups, check the share permissions, and then check the NTFS permissions.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, remember NTFS permissions can be assigned down to the file level. So the top level might be fine, but the file itself or top folder may be fine. If you just do a cursory, well, yeah, he's got access to the drawings folder,
right?
But you have to go to the drawing itself and see if any NTFS permissions are set on that file itself, because somebody may have taken ownership and said, nope, I'm going to have read only for everybody else and full control for me, so they can open it and they can read it, but they can't do anything else.
And I don't know about you, Matt, but this applies in environments that I have worked in with spreadsheets. I don't know what's so special about spreadsheets, but they'll say, I want access, I want Matt to have read, and everybody else gets absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And you just go nuts thinking it's an NTFS issue, then it's a share, and you go, oh, because Mary thought that she was slick. So
yeah, it's best if you could just, yeah.
So
and did we say NTFS permissions are cumulative? So if you're in a group, one group that has read only, or that's allowed read, you're one group. NTFS permissions are cumulative, which are a little different than when you're combining share and NTFS. The most restrictive applies. NTFS are cumulative, so every group that you're a member of can add to your rights.
Now, now I just confused myself. How is that different from the Bob being part of two groups?
Well, okay, so if Bob was given read only on the share,
right,
but he has full only for NTFS, the most restrictive is the read only.
Right. Okay.
So he gets read only. Okay. But if he's allowed read because in the NTFS permissions, he's allowed read because of the marketing group, but he's allowed full control because he's in some kind of manager group, then he's got full control.
Okay.
Even though he's a member of another group that has on read only, if he's not denied anywhere, they're cumulative. So he'll have full control because he's in a group that has full control.
Okay. A question in the chat room. If you copy a folder with incorrect permissions to another partition, then back to the source partition, will you get the correct permission of that share?
Okay. So like what I did the other day is I created the permissions were all messed up. I created a new folder on the other partition, moved it over. So it inherited the permissions of the folder that I copied it to. Then I deleted what was there. Then I created a new folder. Now, if I would have just copied it right back, it would have inherited the top folder or with the parent folder permission. But I deleted that top folder. I created a new folder, gave it the permissions I wanted. So then when I copied it back, every file I copied back took the permissions inherited from the parent folder I created. So yes, if let's say I had a folder, top level folder data, a share or under data share called projects, and projects are shared a certain way. If I copied it off the partition and back to that folder, it's going to inherit what the project folder is set to. So do you understand? Is that confusing everybody? Remember, when you copy it from one partition to another,
Hmm.
it's going to take the target folder.
Exactly.
So if you copy it from one partition to another, whatever folder you're copying it to, it takes the permissions inherited from that target, from the parent folder. Because what happens is, let's say you're moving a file within a partition. Okay, you don't actually create a new file. All you're doing is updating the location in the directory. So nothing actually changed.
Right.
It's just now I said, oh, this file is located here now instead. So it keeps its permissions.
That is why if you ever copy 20 gigs of information, it takes, 10 or 15, 20 minutes. But if you cut or move, it takes 5 seconds. Files are not being moved. It's just the pointer to where the files live in the tree is what changes.
Yeah. So if you move within a partition, it keeps the original partitions. If you move from one partition to another, then it actually is deleting that file, creating a new file, and deleting the old one. So that new file inherits the permissions of the target folder permissions because it's a new file. And if you copy from one partition to another, it creates a new file that inherits the permissions of the target folder also. So anything. So is that clear? Moving in a partition keeps permissions. Moving across the partition, you're actually deleting the file, creating the new one, so you get the target permission folder. Copying within a partition creates a new file. It leaves the other one, but you're copying it, so it creates a new file, and that inherits the permissions of the target folder. It has to do with cut or delete or whatever it's just doing.
All right, cool. We got an okay in the chat room, so cool. Thank you for answering that.
And that's where people get mixed up, those little fine prints. But it can save you sometimes. Like it saved me from having to go through all the folders and see what she did. I just got rid of them all because I tried to force inheritance down, but she had unchecked allow inheritance on a lot of folders. I don't know why.
Which makes your operation a little bit pointless at that point, right?
Right. So I would have to go to each folder and say, okay, and I would have to start at the bottom, allow inheritance. Next folder up, allow inheritance. Next folder up, allow. I had to do this for every folder to where then I could have set the permissions the right way and forced it down. So I didn't feel like doing that. So I just copied it and moved it back, and it worked.
But
it's a miracle.
But there's no way to force the inheritance down, even that bot is unchecked.
If it's unchecked, it's not going to check itself again.
Okay.
Because you're telling it don't inherit folders. So if you uncheck that specifically to not inherit, you can't force inheritance down. You can only force inheritance down to folders that are inheriting.
I wonder if that can be done with the cackles and command. They're definitely command line. But that's me going above me. I'm sorry.
I would like to know if that, because normally when you uncheck that, it's assuming that you don't want to change it.
Let's check on that, because I use that command quite, and I include those in batch files when I'm doing stuff. I'll check on that, and we'll get back to this on next week. So
yes, I would like to know too.
All right, man. Anything else?
I'm sure there is. But that's long enough talking about permissions and security. So, again, that was the basics. Overall, there's always specific instances that you may need specific settings, but overall, this is what you want to do. Just remember that.
Gotcha.
There's no one size fits all on any network.
No, and I have to agree. I've seen it done many different ways. Some ways I would do it, some days I wouldn't do it, as long as it makes sense to the network administrator, so you can administer these rights. That's all that matters at the end of the day. So
that is right.
All right, man. I don't see any emails. Are you, Matt?
I didn't look through my email lately. I don't think so. Not that I'd have to go through it, and I don't have time. You know what I would say with this real quick? You know what I was testing a few days ago?
What?
I was testing Office 365.
Really?
Yeah. So we may be talking about that one week and maybe that compared. And I've also been testing Google Plus, uh,
You know, I mean,
not Google Plus, Google Apps.
okay.
I was invited to Google Plus. I finally got in, but I didn't do it yet. But Google Apps I was testing compared to Office 365.
Yeah, in fact, I got invited to Google Plus too. I don't know that much about it, but I'm gonna jump in head first and start playing with it. I read a
I
couple of reviews and everything, pros and cons, but hey, I'm gonna give it a go.
I can promise this. I will use Google Plus as much as I use Facebook.
Which is none, apparently.
I do log into Facebook once every few weeks, but that's my limit usually. Because really, I don't. Well, I don't want to say that. I don't have time, and I don't want another avenue of worrying about people trying to contact me. They know I don't check it, so they don't try. If I check it, they might try and contact me through Facebook, and they'll be disappointed.
See, and we won't go on a rant on this topic, but you know, like on Facebook, I'm part of because I'm originally from Chicago, so a lot of my friends and families or folks that I've had they're friends with live around the country, around the world. It's pretty neat. But then again, I don't go. You know, I'm eating a sandwich. I'm going to the Waffle House. I'm getting coffee. No, no.
Yeah, I don't like it when I heard the term. I Facebooked them.
Yeah.
You did what? You Facebooked them. The meaning we were all somewhere, and somebody asked where's Bob, and they said, well, I Facebooked him. You didn't actually talk to him or call him. You posted something online and expect him to go look at it and see we're all meeting here. I don't understand that.
Let me take the opportunity to mention Door's product, Linux for the rest of us. And I'm pretty sure Steve just been talking this up, but if my screen were to update, which is not right now. There you go. Phew. Check out his product if you want to learn about Linux, and I'm definitely checking out his videos currently, and he does a great job of explaining the operating system, and he compares it to the Windows operating system, and so it makes it a little bit easier for you to understand. So good job, Door, and if you want to check them out, it's linuxfortherestofus.com. So, all right, man.
Cool.
I think we've went past over the hour mark. It's time for some people to go to bed.
Yes, I'm one of them.
Yeah, you know, it's gonna be a long day when you know what you're already facing with, and the day hasn't even come yet, but you know what you're gonna be facing. So.
Yeah. Future shows. I know Tracy from the Techie Geek. We need to get with Tracy. We had some communication issues, but we are going to talk about Clear OS one week on the show coming up. Of course, there's a Linux-based server operating system, which I know nothing about. So for anyone interested, Tracy will come on and talk about that.
Sweet.
And we also had one request about wanting to know, do you have that email handy?
Yeah. In fact, let me punch it up right now. It is. Of course, I had it handy to you as Fort Matt.
Okay, I got it. You want me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
And this will be maybe the next show. We have to plan our shows.
Yeah.
We have a few topics to cover, but we know what the next 3 or 4 are going to be. So this one, well, I'll start off with the good part.
With the good part.
This is from Kevin. I purchased your How to Be a Better PC Tech and would like to say it will definitely help me in my day-to-day support role, especially the LogMeIn information you provided. I look forward to not walking a user through the LogMeIn account setup and installation, and then they forget the password that they used to set the account, and then we have to uninstall and start over. So he appreciates the videos, Lalo.
I appreciate it.
So he requested, I would like it if you and Matt could discuss your personal journey to becoming the techs that you are today. I feel this could paint a picture to us techs or newbies that would like to be where you and Matt are in the tech world, or just have an idea of some of the struggles, thoughts, and triumphs that you guys had while sacrificing to get where you are today. So that's going to be a show, either the next one, we got to do the Clear OS, we're going to talk about this one week, so that'll be the next few shows. And unfortunately, for anybody who cares, I will be on vacation too the next 4 weeks. So we'll have a show next week.
For anybody who cares, that'll be anyone who's listening to this podcast.
We'll have a show next week. Then we'll do a show the 27th. And then no. We'll have a show next week. Then I'm off the 27th. Then we're here for the 3rd. Then I'm off the 10th.
All right, so those that are listening, there will not be a show July 27th, or there will not be a show on August the 10th.
Yes, so just a heads up. So vacation time. I don't normally take 2 vacations so close together, but my arm was twisted.
Hey, it's all good, man. It happens, right?
It happens. So,
all right, man.
But that'll definitely be the next 2 shows. Hopefully, we'll do Clear OS, and we'll do maybe that one that was requested by Kevin.
Yeah, and I read that email. I thought that was quite interesting because for me, it was a long journey to get to this point. I mean, there was a time where I did not know the difference between many things, including a router or a switch or what a server operating system was, and then we all had our struggles. So.
Oh, I didn't read the PS from that email, Lalo. I'm going to have to read that.
Go ahead.
PS, I wanted to be Lalo Nunez when I grew up.
So for every people that want to be for every 100 people that want to be Matt Rainey, I get Kevin. I appreciate you, man. And quick shout out for the Better PC Tech videos. They're making progress. I sent out a blast email to all the customers who bought the videos. I asked for some beta testers for some of my scripts, and I do have them. I appreciate it. So we're just making sure the scripts work and everything works well, and then the upgraded videos will be the release. And in case you're asking, well, what's taking so long? Things are going on in my life, but I'm trying to get it done as soon as possible. The new code is shorter, it's cleaner, and quick, and a lot easier to modify. So, and I appreciate guys all the cool emails that I get and how it makes your life a little bit easier. Cause at the end of the day, you want to go home at a decent time and watch, just spend time with the family and friends, or watch the football game, if they don't get locked out. But
we got soccer. Hey, watch soccer.
That's right. All right, Matt. Got anything to say to the people at home?
Thanks for listening. Appreciate it. If you want to leave some reviews in iTunes for this show or any other Podnutz show, please do that. That helps out the show. So good feedback on iTunes. Bad feedback, you can email me, matt@podnutz.com.
Exactly, and you can email me at lalo@podnutz.com. Thank you for taking the time to watch the show live. If you're downloading this episode, again, the whole goal is to make this a little bit less scary. I know that for me, from personal experience, Matt, when that one aisle at Best Buy with all the switches and the routers, I don't want to go down there because I have no idea what that does. So I'm just being honest, but so it just makes the understanding or the foundation down where you can take that step forward and go for it. So
yep. I've seen people who put in routers because they looked like put in hubs for a switch because they thought they're putting in a router. They put in a hub because it looked like a router. Mm-hmm. So we can help that person out.
Exactly. So exactly. Well, again, you all have a good week, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.